Nurses who can't follow protocol might find themselves escorted out by security. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 17 minutes before the unidentified Army Ranger arrived in Trauma Bay 3. Danielle Ross moves through Seattle General in Portland with the practiced invisibility of someone who learned long ago that survival means staying unseen. Her scrubs are perpetually pressed, their edges sharp as a surgical crease. Her stride is measured, her face a blank canvas that reveals nothing, not frustration, not fear, not the 17 years of memory she carries like shrapnel embedded too deep to extract. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting sterile blue-white across polished linoleum that smells of antiseptic and floor wax and something underneath both, something like copper and regret. The vending machine by the third-floor medication station is where Whitfield corners her. She's inserting quarters, 4 of them, exactly 80 cents for the black coffee she doesn't taste anymore, when his shadow falls across the machine's glowing interior. Danielle doesn't turn. She already knows the sound of his footsteps, the rhythm of his breathing when he's about to deliver a threat. "I noticed you questioned my discharge order this morning," he says. His voice carries the tone of a man accustomed to obedience, each word wrapped in the assumption that she will nod and apologize. "And last week, you suggested an alternative diagnosis during rounds." Danielle retrieves her coffee. The cup drops with a metallic clink. She turns to face him, her expression neutral as a dormant sea. "The patient benefited from the extended observation," she says. 8 words. Measured. Respectful. The voice of someone who knows her place. Whitfield's jaw tightens. He is tall, expensively dressed, the kind of tall that comes with legacy admissions and country club memberships. His watch is a Tag Heuer, approximately $4,000. His wedding ring is platinum. Everything about him announces that he has never been questioned by someone with less authority, and the experience clearly irritates him like sand in expensive shoes. "What I'm saying, Nurse Ross, is that protocol exists for a reason. Nurses who can't follow protocol, who insert themselves into clinical decisions that aren't their domain, might find themselves escorted out by security." He pauses, letting the threat breathe. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Her jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. The muscle there, just below her ear, flexes for exactly 1 second. Then it releases. Her hands remain steady against the coffee cup, steam rising from the opening like something escaping. "I understand, Dr. Whitfield," she says. She doesn't say she agrees. He doesn't notice the distinction. He nods with the satisfaction of a man who believes he has just reasserted dominance. "Good. Keep your focus on vitals and charting. Leave the thinking to the physicians." He turns and walks back toward the elevator, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like punctuation marks on a sentence designed to hurt. Danielle stands motionless for approximately 12 seconds. Then she brings the coffee to her lips. It's already cooling. She doesn't taste it. She tastes something else, dust and copper and the specific flavor of humiliation that tastes the same whether you've survived it once or 1,000 times. The overhead intercom crackles to life before she can move. Paramedics en route, ETA 4 minutes. Trauma activation. Army Ranger, unresponsive, no identification. The words pass through the hospital like electricity through a circuit. Danielle feels them in her sternum, a jolt that has nothing to do with the announcement and everything to do with the word Army Ranger spoken aloud in a hallway where no one knows what that phrase means to her. She sets the coffee down on the vending machine's ledge without drinking it. She's moving before she consciously decides to move. The elevator doors are closing on the far side of the corridor, Whitfield already descending. Danielle takes the stairs, 7 flights, her legs carrying her with the efficiency of someone whose muscles remember drills that her mind has spent 17 years trying to forget. Her scrub pocket bounces against her ribs with each footfall. Inside, a pen, a small penlight, and a faded photograph in a plastic sleeve that she should have thrown away years ago but never has. Trauma Bay 3 is already chaos in slow motion, the kind of controlled frenzy that only looks calm to someone who has seen actual chaos. The paramedics are still 3 minutes out. The nurses are prepping for stands positioned, monitor leads laid out like a spider's web, the ventilator humming its mechanical prayer in the corner of the room. Danielle scrubs in without speaking to anyone, pulling on latex gloves that snap like gunshots against her wrists. The ambulance bay doors open with a pneumatic hiss, and the paramedics roll in with their stretcher moving at the speed of practiced emergency. 1, 2, 3, the mattress bouncing slightly over the threshold. The patient is a man, early 50s, his face the color of old drywall, his breathing shallow and irregular through an oxygen mask. No wallet visible. No identification. His right hand is clenched into a fist so tight that his fingernails have drawn crescents of blood into his palm. Army Ranger, found unresponsive in a parking garage off Morrison Street, the lead paramedic says, rattling off vitals like coordinates to a destination. BP 88/52. Heart rate 118. O2 sat 92 on supplemental. We've established 2 18-gauge lines. Last glucose check at the scene was 64. They transfer him to the bed in one smooth motion, the practiced choreography of people who have done this hundreds of times. His left arm flops against his side, and his clenched right fist extends toward the edge of the mattress where Danielle is reaching to assess his pupils. She sees it before she touches it. A tarnished military challenge coin, worn from decades of being carried, the lettering on its face so faded that the words are almost illegible. It's pressed into his palm with the grip of someone who has been holding it for a very long time, as if letting go might cause him to sink deeper into whatever darkness has claimed his consciousness. Danielle's gloved fingers carefully pry open his hand, gentle as she would handle a grenade with the pin already pulled. The coin comes free. She holds it for 3 seconds, 4, 5, long enough for the paramedics to notice her hesitation, for the second nurse to glance at her with mild curiosity, for the monitors to register the subtle change in the room's atmosphere that occurs when someone learns something they weren't supposed to know. The coin is from a specific unit. The 75th Ranger Regiment. The lettering on the front reads like a prayer she hasn't spoken since Fallujah. Ranger. Lead the way. She logs it as patient property with a voice that sounds like it's coming from someone else. Personal effects secured in locked cabinet, she says, and no one hears the way her words have become very small, very controlled, the voice of a person who has learned that showing nothing is the only way to keep everything. Dr. Whitfield arrives precisely when the patient has been fully assessed, the monitors established, the 4 fluids running clear through the lines. He scans the chart with the disinterested expression of someone reviewing inventory, announces that the patient appears stable enough for general admission and transfer to the second floor, and leaves with the same confident stride that carried him away from the vending machine. Danielle remains at the bedside for 3 more minutes than necessary. She checks vitals that don't need checking. She adjusts the 4 lines so it hangs at a more perfect angle. She lets her eyes linger on the patient's face, searching for something she doesn't expect to find and would likely be destroyed if she did. The supply closet on the 3rd floor is small, barely larger than a closet, lined with sterile gauze packages and saline bags and boxes of latex gloves arranged in precise rows. She closes the door behind her and stands in the fluorescent-lit quiet. Her left arm is bare above her glove. She pulls her sleeve up slowly, as if the gesture itself might trigger an alarm. The scar tissue runs from her wrist to her elbow, a burn pattern shaped like a hand, fingers outstretched, from the night in 2008 when she'd been carrying a bleeding soldier 3 blocks through Fallujah under sniper fire. The insurgents had been closing in. She'd been on fire. She'd kept moving anyway. She traces the scar with her right index finger, her touch light as prayer. The nerve damage means she feels it as pressure and heat, not pain. Pain requires a nervous system that hasn't been burned to uselessness. Pain requires being alive. She'd stopped expecting that a long time ago. The soldier she'd carried that night had her name tattooed on his bicep. That's what he'd told her in the medevac helicopter, his voice thick and confused from the morphine, his hand gripping her collar like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. She'd never seen the tattoo. She'd disappeared 3 days later, extracted by the government, scrubbed from official records after the mission went sideways. Everything about that night, the soldier, the extraction, Danielle Ross as she used to exist, had been classified into non-existence. Until 17 minutes ago, when a tarnished challenge coin landed in her palm like a message from the past that refused to stay buried. She lowers her sleeve carefully, methodically, as if covering the scar might erase the memory. It doesn't. The memories are too old, too deep. They're part of the infrastructure now, the foundation she's built everything on for the past 17 years, the invisibility, the protocol, the careful distance between who she was and who she's allowed herself to become. The supply closet is so quiet she can hear the fluorescent lights humming, a sound like electricity singing inside the walls. She stands there for what might be 30 seconds or 30 minutes, her hand still raised to the scar, and waits for something she can't name. The intercom crackles again, announcing a code on the 4th floor. The moment breaks. She lowers her arm and returns to the hallway, where the hospital continues its business of saving lives and following protocol and asking no questions about the nurses who move through its corridors like ghosts. Thursday morning broke grey and cold over Portland, rain hammering the hospital windows as Danielle pushed a med cart down the 4th floor corridor toward the amphitheater. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song above her head. 40 residents filled the tiered lecture hall this morning, attending physicians scattered among them like seeds waiting to bloom into more versions of Dr. Whitfield. She could already feel the weight of their collective attention before the grand rounds even began, the kind of pressure that came from being one of 2 nurses permitted in the observation area during teaching sessions. Protocol demanded it. Documentation required a witness from bedside care. Danielle had never minded before. This morning felt different. She positioned herself against the back wall, spine aligned with the acoustic paneling, arms loose at her sides. The pose looked casual. Every muscle underneath was locked down tight, controlled breathing, the kind of discipline that came from 17 years of standing in places where any tell could get you killed. The amphitheater smelled like coffee and antiseptic and the particular staleness of air that had been recycled through climate control since before dawn. Dr. Whitfield stood at the podium below, silver hair swept back from a face carved from marble and authority, his white coat pressed sharp enough to cut. He smiled. It looked like a predator's smile. Grand rounds this morning, he announced, his voice the kind of resonant tone that filled rooms without shouting, will focus on the intersection of clinical judgment and emotional reasoning in patient care. He clicked his laser pointer. The projector hummed. A patient roster appeared on the screen behind him, rows of case numbers and diagnostic codes in white text on blue background. Danielle watched his hand move across the display until the red highlight found exactly what he was hunting for. Her name. The John Doe's case number. Thursday 0247 hours admission, Trauma Bay 3. Let me illustrate, Whitfield continued, what happens when protocol breaks down. His eyes found her in the back of the room. She felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing, like pressure applied to skin. Nurse Ross here has submitted 3 separate requests to delay discharge of this particular patient. 3. To County Psych. Citing, he paused, reading from the file with theatrical precision, incomplete neurological assessment and potential traumatic brain injury complications. He let that hang in the air. Around the amphitheater, residents exchanged glances. A few smirked. The sound of pen scratching on notepads echoed in the stone silence. This, Whitfield said, turning to face the assembled residents directly, is precisely why we maintain clear hierarchical protocols. Nurses observe. Nurses document. Nurses report. Physicians diagnose. Physicians decide. When those lines blur, when a nurse begins to believe her bedside instinct supersedes medical training and institutional authority, we get what I call Nightingale syndrome. His voice dropped into something almost conversational, the tone of a mentor sharing hard-won wisdom. A romanticization of the nurse's role. An inflation of clinical authority. An inability to accept the fundamental structure that keeps hospitals functioning and patients safe. Laughter rippled through the residents. Not loud. Not cruel. Worse, polite. Professional. The sound of people who had no context, no stakes, no understanding of why that particular patient's neurological status mattered, like it was tethered to their own heartbeat. Danielle watched Whitfield's jaw flex slightly as he smiled at his own joke. She felt the weight of 40 pairs of eyes, some curious, some pitying, some calculating how much distance they should maintain from someone Dr. Whitfield had publicly flagged as a liability. Her hands, hanging loose behind her back, tightened into fists. Then slowly, methodically, unclenched. Her breathing stayed even. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 6. A rhythm she'd learned in a forward operating base in Helmand Province 17 years ago, where the only way to survive being shot at was to convince your nervous system that the danger was theoretical. That you were already dead and therefore perfectly calm. The challenge with nurses like Ross, Whitfield was saying now, his eyes tracking the residents as he spoke, moving them along a narrative arc like a conductor moving musicians through an orchestra, is that they often bring external context into clinical decision-making. Personal experiences. Emotional baggage. Perhaps a desire to save someone they remind them of. He paused. His gaze found her again. The problem with that approach is that it clouds judgment. It creates liability. It puts the institution at risk. Danielle's face remained a mask. An absolute, immobile mask. The kind of mask that took practice to maintain when someone was methodically dismantling your competence in front of 40 people who would repeat these words in hallways and break rooms and residency program meetings. She felt the slight tremor in her forearms, not fear, she recognized it accurately, but restraint. The physical manifestation of rage held so tightly it turned into something that looked like calm. One resident in the front row raised his hand. Whitfield nodded at him. "So the discharge recommendation stands?" the resident asked. "The discharge stands," Whitfield confirmed. "County Psych will handle any psychiatric complications. Our role here is acute trauma management. Once that phase concludes, our responsibility ends. Neat. Clean. Protocol compliant." He clicked off the slide. The patient roster disappeared. Any other questions about the importance of maintaining professional boundaries? No hands went up. Danielle watched the resident scribble final notes, already moving mentally to the next case, the next teaching point, the next opportunity to impress the man at the podium. She remained against the wall, breathing, waiting. The amphitheater began to empty. Residents filed past her without making eye contact, a small exodus of white coats and stethoscopes and futures that Dr. Whitfield controlled through his network of recommendations and references and carefully cultivated relationships with program directors at Mayo and Johns Hopkins and Walter Reed. The room cleared. Whitfield began organizing his papers at the podium. Danielle turned to leave. "Ross." His voice stopped her at the threshold. She turned back. He was looking up from his notes, his expression pleasant in a way that suggested he was about to say something specifically designed to hurt. "A word before you go." She walked back toward the podium. He set down his pen with deliberate care. "I reviewed your personnel file this morning," he said conversationally. "Fascinating reading. Community college RN program. No bachelor's degree. No specialty certifications." He smiled. "Just adequate." Danielle said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence was a tool. That the space between statements could be more powerful than a rebuttal. She let the silence sit between them, heavy as a body. "Here's what I want you to understand," Whitfield continued, stepping closer. His voice dropped into the theatrical whisper that he probably thought was private but which absolutely carried to the 3 residents who'd lingered near the back exit, pretending to review their phones. "Adequate nurses who question my discharge orders. Adequate nurses who submit complaints about my clinical judgment. Adequate nurses who believe they have the expertise to second-guess an attending physician's assessment. Those nurses tend to find themselves reassigned. Extended rotations in psych. Swing shift assignments." Or, he paused, letting the threat sit, escorted from the building by security. "Your choice, Ross. You understand." Danielle met his eyes. Just for 2 seconds. Long enough for him to see that she wasn't intimidated. Long enough for him to know that she'd heard him clearly. Long enough for him to wonder, for just a fraction of a second, if he'd made a miscalculation. Then she stepped around him, her gait absolutely even, her posture unchanged, her breathing still locked at exactly the same measured pace as when she'd entered the amphitheater 40 minutes earlier. "I'll keep that in mind, Doctor," she said quietly. She made it to the ICU without stopping. Made it through the afternoon shift, attending to 3 ventilator patients and a post-op from general surgery, her hand steady, her documentation flawless, her responses to resident questions helpful and professional and utterly unremarkable. Made it through charting. Made it through the 1900 hours shift change briefing. Made it until the medical supply closet at 2,130 hours when the patient census dropped and the night shift nurse had stepped away to answer a trauma alert. That's when she sat down on an overturned bucket surrounded by boxes of gauze and 4 kits, the aluminum walls pressing close, the smell of sterile saline and plastic tubing heavy in the recycled air. That's when her breath finally shook on the exhale. That's when she traced the scar on her forearm, white and thin and barely visible under her skin, the kind of scar that told a story nobody knew how to read anymore, and stared at nothing for 7 minutes before the trembling stopped and she was herself again. The ICU monitor sounds continued on the other side of the wall. Ventilators wheezed. Pumps beeped. The hospital continued its endless work of saving lives and following protocol and asking no questions about the nurses who moved through its corridors like ghosts, indispensable and invisible in equal measure. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came Friday afternoon, when someone arrived who could see through her mask. Saturday morning arrived with the quiet efficiency of bad news delivered by people who'd rehearsed their lines. Danielle pushed through the automatic doors of Seattle General at 6:13 a.m., her badge already in hand, the habit from 17 years of showing up before sunrise, before the politics woke up, before the egos inflated themselves with coffee and authority. The badge reader at the ICU entrance beeped once. Red light. Access denied. She tried again. Same result. The charge nurse, Maria, appeared from the medication room with a resignation that looked practiced, like she'd been waiting for this moment since yesterday afternoon. "They reassigned you," Maria said quietly, her eyes not quite meeting Danielle's. "Effective immediately. Outpatient wound care. Basement clinic." The words landed like stones in still water, spreading out in silent ripples. Danielle's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Her hands remained steady as she extended the badge toward Maria, watching the younger nurse's fingers tremble slightly as she took it. Not from fear. From sympathy. That was worse. "The paperwork's in HR," Maria continued, the words coming faster now, like she needed to get them out before her courage failed. "Credential review. Routine." They said routine. Danielle nodded once. A single movement. Nothing in her face betrayed the calculation happening behind her eyes, the mental map of every exit, every camera, every way to reach the ICU without passing through the main corridor where Whitfield maintained his territory like a predator marking his range. The John Doe was somewhere 3 floors up in that maze of monitored beds, his tarnished challenge coin logged into patient belongings, his identity still locked away in the silence of medical coma. And now she couldn't reach him. "Who signed the order?" Danielle's voice was flat. Clinical. The voice of someone asking about lab results, not her own professional execution. Whitfield. And the board member. The one who came Friday. Maria glanced toward the stairwell, then back. "His name's Bancroft. From the insurance consortium. He told the director there were liability concerns with your patient interactions." The phrase hung in the air like contaminated blood on a latex glove. Patient interactions. As if saving a man's life in a trauma bay qualified as a liability. As if 17 years of hands that had learned to work in darkness and under fire represented a problem rather than a solution. Danielle collected her things from the ICU locker, 3 scrubs folded with military precision, a stethoscope that had survived 2 continents and 1 complete erasure from existence, a bottle of hand lotion with the label worn smooth from 10,000 applications. She moved through the corridors of Seattle General like she'd moved through the mountains of Helmand Province, visible but unremarkable, present but transparent, a ghost in green scrubs and worn danskos. The morning shift change erupted around her, residents checking orders, nurses comparing notes on admits, the organized chaos of a hospital waking up. Nobody noticed her leaving. She was halfway to the stairwell when the voice stopped her. "Ross." A moment. Dr. Whitfield emerged from the physician's lounge like he'd been waiting behind the door, and probably had. His smile was the smile of a man who'd just won something. His eyes were the color of a shark's, clear, empty, utterly without mercy or doubt. He wore a Rolex that cost more than Danielle made in 2 months, and he wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never once doubted he deserved it. "I wanted to assure you this is purely procedural," he said, positioning himself between her and the stairwell with the casual dominance of someone accustomed to owning the space around him. "When irregularities appear in employment records, we have a duty to investigate. Hospital policy. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding." His tone said otherwise. His tone said he'd already made his phone calls. His tone said the misunderstanding had been hers, thinking she could challenge him, question him, suggest he might be wrong about a patient's discharge status. His tone said he was going to dismantle her piece by piece, credential by credential, until the only thing left was the official story, that Danielle Ross had never existed at all. "Understood," she said. 6 letters. 1 syllable. Not a question, not a negotiation. She stepped left. He stepped right, blocking her path with the confidence of a man who'd never met resistance that didn't eventually yield. "The investigator will be here Monday morning. Just routine interviews. Your training records, references, clinical rotations. Standard background verification." His smile widened. "You'll have nothing to worry about if everything checks out." The implication was a knife, sharp and clean, it won't check out. He knew it wouldn't. Every reference he'd mentioned was a name that had been scrubbed from records, every rotation logged in files that no longer officially existed, every supervisor erased as part of an extraction protocol so classified that even mentioning the program name could trigger federal prosecution. Whitfield was using the system against her, using the very machinery that had made her disappear in the first place, turning it into a weapon that only he could see. Masterful. Cruel. Competent. Danielle's eyes met his for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to let him see that she understood. Long enough to let him believe he'd won. Then she stepped around him, her shoulder clearing his by inches, and descended the stairwell to the basement clinic where wound care patients and has-been nurses spent their days slowly forgetting why they'd ever wanted to save lives in the first place. The investigator arrived Monday morning at 8:15 a.m., before the outpatient clinic had fully opened. Her name was Marcus Chen, her suit was charcoal gray, and her pen moved across her notepad with the precision of someone recording a confession rather than asking questions. She was small, perhaps 5'2", but she carried herself with the authority of institutional power, the kind that came from making or breaking careers on a daily basis without ever raising her voice above conversational volume. They sat in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor, fluorescent lights casting everything in the color of institutional permanence. Chen asked the routine questions first: nursing school graduation date, name of dean of nursing, clinical rotation hospitals, supervising physicians' names and contact information. Danielle answered each with the responses she'd prepared 17 years ago, the moment the extraction order came through, the carefully documented history that would hold up under casual scrutiny but collapse under real investigation. University of Washington. Class of 2005. Pause. Dean was Dr. Patricia Holbrook. She retired in 2018. And your clinical rotations? Chen's pen was already paused, suspended over the notepad like a guillotine. Mercy General in Seattle. 6-month rotation in emergency medicine under Dr. James Caldwell. The name tasted like ash. All of them were dead or relocated or had their records quietly sealed by people who worked for the same alphabet agencies that had sealed Danielle's. Chen wrote nothing. Her pen simply waited. The silence stretched like a patient on a surgical table, waiting for the incision. When she finally spoke, her voice was the precise temperature of polite destruction. "I called Mercy General this morning. They have no record of a James Caldwell on staff in 2005. They also have no record of a clinical rotation under that name in their emergency department." Chen's eyes lifted from her notepad. "They do have a record of a small fire in their basement medical record storage in August 2005. Destroyed about 40% of their files from that year." Danielle's hands remained folded on the table. Her breathing remained steady. Her composure was the composure of someone who'd sat in interrogation rooms before, not as a prisoner, but as something worse, a ghost being asked to explain why it refused to stay dead. "I remember that fire," Danielle said quietly. "It was in the news." "Yes. It was quite thorough. Convenient, in some respects. Almost as convenient as the fact that University of Washington has no record of a Danielle Ross graduating from their nursing program in 2005, despite issuing you what appears to be legitimate credentials." Chen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Almost as convenient as the employment gap between 2006 and 2010. 5 years. You have no record of employment, residence, or federal tax filings during that entire period." "I was traveling. Personal matters. For 5 years." "Yes." Chen returned to her notepad, writing now with the satisfied efficiency of someone completing a verdict rather than gathering evidence. When she finished, she closed the notebook with the finality of a casket closing. "You'll be on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation. Full pay, of course. Hospital policy. Dr. Whitfield will be overseeing your case personally." She stood, her small frame somehow commanding the room like she was 8 feet tall and made of titanium. "We'll be in touch." That afternoon, before Danielle had even returned to the basement clinic, Whitfield signed a transfer order. The John Doe, still unresponsive, still hovering in the space between brain death and recovery, was being moved. Not to a step-down unit for continued neurological observation. Not to a residential facility for long-term rehabilitation. To county psychiatric hold. Pending evaluation. Indefinite duration. Danielle watched through the glass partition as 2 orderlies in green scrubs prepared the stretcher. She watched as they logged the patient's belongings into transport, 2 sealed plastic bags, hospital-issue clothing, and 1 tarnished challenge coin that glinted under the fluorescent lights like a piece of someone's erased history. She watched as they wheeled him toward the elevator, and the moment the doors slid closed, something in her chest that had been measured and controlled for 17 years began to fracture along its hidden fault lines. The trembling started in her hands. Not fear. Never fear. But restraint. The kind of restraint that came from being trained to survive interrogation, to survive isolation, to survive the knowledge that disappearing people was how government solved problems. She gripped the edge of the medication cart, her knuckles going white, and when Rodriguez appeared beside her, Rodriguez, who'd served in the Navy, who still wore his dog tags under his scrubs, who'd noticed the small things about Danielle that other people missed, she was already pulling out her phone. "Watch him," she said quietly, texting Rodriguez the details. "John Doe, county transport, psychiatric hold, 3:45 p.m. departure. Don't let them lose him." Rodriguez read the text, then looked at her for the first time with something that might have been understanding, or might have been recognition of his own. "What happened to him?" "Everything." Danielle's voice was steady again. The trembling had passed. And now Whitfield's making sure nobody can trace why. At 2:07 a.m. on Monday, the basement clinic of Seattle General was silent except for the fluorescent hum and the rhythmic beep of the sterilizer cycling through another load. Danielle restocked suture kits with methodical precision, 14-gauge needles, 4.0 absorbable, 6.0 silk, her hands moving through muscle memory while her mind wandered nowhere at all. Staying busy meant not thinking about the termination letter she could feel coming, the way predators smell weakness in water. Her phone buzzed against her hip. A text from Rodriguez, the night shift ICU charge nurse who'd served 2 tours alongside her in 2008, John Doe crashing. Resident frozen. Need you now. No question mark. Not a request. Danielle didn't hesitate. She dropped the suture kit, her badge clipping to her scrubs, the one that didn't work on the 4th floor anymore, the access that Whitfield had quietly stripped away, and took the service stairs 3 at a time. Her boots hit each step like a countdown. The 4th floor ICU doors slid open to a controlled chaos that meant something was dying, the monitor screaming its arrhythmia alarm, nurses moving with focused urgency, the crash cart already positioned. And standing frozen beside the bed was a first-year resident, maybe 26, staring at the defibrillator pads in his hands like they might explode. The John Doe was flatlining. His chest rose and fell with the ventilator's mechanical wheeze, but the monitor showed nothing but noise, fine ventricular fibrillation, the kind that meant the heart had given up its rhythm entirely. "Step aside," Danielle said, her voice dropping an octave, the command authority that no hospital staff nurse should possess cutting through the chaos like a blade through water. She didn't ask. Didn't wait for attending approval. The resident jumped back as if burned. Rodriguez was already prepping the internal defibrillator pads, understanding her intention before she'd moved. His jaw was tight, but his hands were steady. Danielle made a vertical incision through the sternum with a scalpel that felt like an extension of her fingers, muscle memory from field medicine, from the kind of medicine performed by flashlight in dark places where there was no time for protocols. The blade went through skin and subcutaneous tissue and into the fibrous sheath of the chest cavity. Blood bloomed across the surgical field, dark and immediate. She reached for the rib spreader, positioned it at the incision, and cracked the chest open with a decisive movement that made 2 attending physicians take a step backward. Two-handed compression, she instructed the resident, whose face had gone the color of old coffee. 60 compressions per minute. Don't tear the myocardium. Her gloved hands moved into the chest cavity, fingers finding the heart muscle, still and useless and cold. She began direct cardiac massage, compressing the ventricles with the precise rhythm of someone who'd done this in the dark with insurgents closing in from both sides, who'd kept blood flowing through human tissue when there was nothing else between a dying man and the ground. 90 seconds. The monitor still screaming. 120 seconds. Her hands moving without thought, without hesitation, muscle and bone and years of training compressed into motion. 180 seconds. The heart twitched. Then again. Then a rhythm, weak, irregular, but there. A pulse beneath her fingers that hadn't existed 5 seconds before. The monitor picked it up a beat later, the line spiking upward, the room erupting in the controlled chaos of resuscitation success. The surgical attending moved in smoothly, pushing Danielle back, taking over the closure. She stepped away from the bed, her gloves dripping red, her expression unchanged, already moving toward the sink to scrub out. Rodriguez watched her go, his eyes bright with something that might have been pride or might have been the beginning of knowing this was the last time he'd see her work. But that wasn't the worst part. By 6:24 a.m., Dr. Whitfield had reviewed the security footage from the ICU. By 9:15 a.m., he had called an emergency board meeting. By 11:41 a.m., 2 security guards arrived at the basement clinic where Danielle was organizing medication inventory, the work she'd been reassigned to, the work they gave to nurses who'd become problems. "We need your badge and locker keys," the first guard said, his tone professional and apologetic in the way security personnel got when they were following orders they didn't entirely approve of. Whitfield arrived 2 minutes later, holding an envelope the color of burnt cream. He smiled as he handed it to her, a smile like a predator showing its teeth, satisfaction barely concealed beneath the veneer of professional concern. "You're done, Ross," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Gross insubordination. Unauthorized access to restricted areas. Performance of medical procedures outside your scope of practice. I've documented everything. The board is unanimous." He paused, letting the silence settle. "You should have stayed in your lane." Danielle opened the envelope. The letterhead read Seattle General Hospital, Executive Termination Notice. The words were carefully chosen, legally airtight, each sentence a small knife designed to remove any possibility of unemployment benefits, any chance of a recommendation, any future in nursing anywhere that ran a background check. At the bottom, in the administrative section, someone had noted, fitness for continued employment, compromised. She read it twice. Her face remained perfectly blank, a mask she'd perfected 15 years ago, but her hands trembled as she folded the letter. Not from fear. From restraint. From the knowledge that if she moved wrong, if she said what she was actually thinking, the security guards would have to physically remove her, and she'd given Whitfield enough ammunition already. "Thank you for the clarity," she said quietly, her voice steady, and handed over her badge. The security guards walked her through the main lobby at the change of shift. Past residents. Past the nurses she'd trained, the ones who looked away because looking at her meant choosing a side. Past the vending machine where Whitfield had threatened her 4 days ago. The rain outside had picked up, hammering the windows like applause for his victory. Rodriguez watched from the 4th-floor ICU window, his knuckles white on the glass. She didn't look up at him. Looking would have been a mercy she couldn't give herself, a moment of connection that might crack the composure holding her together. Instead, she walked straight through the automatic doors, into the Portland rain, and didn't stop walking until the hospital disappeared behind her. At the front desk, she surrendered her ID badge to a security officer she'd known for 3 years. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Nobody wanted to see what was happening. Nobody wanted to admit that the system could be weaponized like that competence and compassion could be used against you, that saving a life could cost you everything. She walked 6 blocks in the rain without any destination, just motion, just forward. The diner appeared on her left around 2:48 a.m., its neon sign reflected in standing water on the sidewalk. She pushed through the glass door, ordered black coffee she didn't want, and took the vinyl booth in the back corner facing the door, the tactical position, the habit that never left, the ghost of who she'd been before she learned to be invisible. The coffee went cold in the chipped mug. Outside, the rain didn't stop. It felt like she'd always imagined grief would fall if grief ever took physical form, steady, relentless, the kind of weather that made you forget there was ever any other kind of sky. She stared at her reflection in the window. A woman in her mid-40s with scarred forearms and hollow eyes and a faded hoodie that said nothing about who she'd been. The uniform had been holding her together. Without it, she looked like someone who'd been erased twice and barely survived the first time. 3 days of that. 3 days of coffee shops and cheap motel rooms paid in cash, of checking her phone to see if Rodriguez had called and knowing that he wouldn't, that calling her was exactly the kind of professional liability that had gotten her fired in the first place. Then the door chimed. The vinyl booth at Murphy's 24-hour diner smelled like 17 years of burnt coffee and regret. Danielle sat with her hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold 3 hours ago, her reflection fractured in the rain-streaked window behind the counter. 3 days. 72 hours of motel rooms where she paid cash and didn't answer her phone, of sitting in diners exactly like this one, watching other people's lives move forward while hers contracted into something smaller, quieter, invisible again. The challenge coin sat on the table in front of her, tarnished silver catching the fluorescent glare. She'd carried it for 17 years. It had survived Fallujah, survived the extraction, survived the erasure. It hadn't survived what happened when competence became a threat to the wrong man's authority. The door chimed at 3:47 in the morning. Danielle didn't look up. She'd learned long ago that looking was how people found you. But the silence that followed the chime was wrong, the kind of silence that meant someone had just walked in who changed the air pressure in the room. She lifted her eyes. The man in the Navy security uniform came first, hand on the shoulder of a younger man in a hospital-issue sweatshirt and worn jeans. Walking. Alert. Awake. The John Doe from Trauma Bay 3. The one she'd carried under fire in a city called Fallujah, whose name she didn't know until they'd scrubbed her from every record that mattered. His eyes locked on hers across the diner, and for a moment neither of them breathed. Phantom, he said. Not a question. A recognition. A name that hadn't been spoken aloud in 15 years. The security guard's entire body went rigid. His hand came up in a salute so sharp it sounded like a gunshot against tile. Master Chief, he said, his voice stripped of everything but absolute deference. Danielle set down her coffee mug with the precise control of someone who'd held herself together through things that would shatter ordinary people. She didn't stand. She didn't acknowledge the salute. She did what she'd learned to do in 17 years of controlled invisibility. She waited. The John Doe crossed the diner. Up close, she saw the scarring on his left temple, the surgical precision of the work that had kept him breathing when 17-year-old combat medicine had been all she had. His eyes were the color of winter water, and they were fixed on her face like he was trying to memorize something he'd lost. "Marcus Chen," he said, and his voice cracked on the second word. "Master Chief Ranger, 75th Regiment, retired medical. You carried me 3 blocks under sniper fire on March 15, 2008. You were 19 years old. You had a bleeding wound in your left shoulder from a round that should have killed you. You didn't stop running. You didn't stop screaming for a medevac. You didn't let me die in the street." Danielle's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her hand stayed folded on the table. "You shouldn't be here," she said, and her voice had dropped an octave, the mask slipping just enough for the truth to show through. "You were unconscious. You were sedated." "Rodriguez woke me up," Marcus said. He pulled up his left sleeve. Her name was there, inked in the careful letters of someone who'd planned to carry it for the rest of his life. Above it, 5 words in smaller script, *, "She carried me home, *. He told me everything. He told me why you wouldn't let me die. He told me what they did to you when you got back. He told me you were sitting alone somewhere drinking cold coffee at 3 in the morning because you saved my life and the hospital repaid you with erasure." The security guard cleared his throat. "Master Chief, there's a military transport waiting outside. Orders come from the Pentagon. They're asking you to come with us. No questions, no negotiations. They're calling it the reinstatement review." Danielle picked up the challenge coin. The silver was dull, marked by 17 years of being clutched in a dead man's hand, a living man's hand, a nurse's hand. She stood. When she moved, both men straightened, that involuntary reflex of soldiers recognizing command. "Let's go," she said. The Seattle General Conference Room on the 4th floor had been scrubbed and reconfigured. The long mahogany table was surrounded by people Danielle had never seen before, a 2-star general in pressed dress blues, a Navy JG attorney with a tablet and an expression carved from granite, 2 FBI agents in dark suits that looked like they'd been pressed with a hydraulic vice, and the hospital's board chair, who looked like he'd aged 10 years since she'd last seen him 3 days ago. Dr. Whitfield was already there, sitting at the far end of the table with his hands folded in front of him, his confidence from the vending machine replaced by something that looked like the slow understanding that the ground beneath him was giving way. The general opened a folder. Inside were documents Danielle recognized only from their absence, her service record, unsealed. Her deployment logs. Her citation. Her real name attached to operations that officially never happened. The general began reading aloud, his voice filling the room like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Bronze Star for leadership under fire in Anbar Province, 2007, he said, and Whitfield's hands clenched slightly. Silver Star for direct action in Fallujah, March 2008. Whitfield's face had gone pale. 2 Purple Hearts, service-related wounds in theater. The general paused. Everyone in the room was watching Whitfield now. And a Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in direct contact with enemy forces while sustaining multiple wounds and refusing medical evacuation until all personnel under her command were secured. The board chair leaned back in his chair. Dr. Whitfield opened his mouth to speak. "You," the general said, not looking at Whitfield, "terminated a decorated Master Chief Petty Officer and Navy Cross recipient because she performed a life-saving procedure that exceeded her nursing scope." He turned a laptop around. On the screen, performance reviews dated back 6 months, flagged in red, every single one fabricated. Incident reports with Danielle's signature forged in an approximation that was obvious now that someone was looking for it. Credential investigation requests with falsified dates and unsigned authorizations. All of it traced back to one source, Dr. Whitfield's hospital login, his office IP address, his personal laptop sitting in evidence bags beside the keyboard. These documents were created on your personal computer using hospital network access, one of the FBI agents said, and his voice had the flat effect of someone who'd delivered worse news to worse people. Between December 2nd and January 18th. All of them backdated. All of them designed to create legal justification for termination. He paused. That's federal falsification of records. That's conspiracy to defraud. That's obstruction of a federal investigation into an individual recognized for military valor. Whitfield's voice came out cracked and small. I was protecting the hospital. She performed surgery without authorization. She violated protocol. I was acting in the hospital's interests. She performed a field procedure that saved the life of an Army Ranger holding the Medal of Honor, the general said. His voice was the sound of a tank engine idling in a stone garage, controlled, infinite, capable of running indefinitely while everything around it was destroyed. While you, Dr. Whitfield, committed multiple felonies to cover your incompetence and protect your ego. The FBI agents stood. One of them pulled handcuffs from his belt. Whitfield's hands were shaking now, visibly, the tremor of someone watching his entire constructed world cave inward in real time. The metal cuffs clicked shut with a sound like a door slamming closed on a grave. They walked him through the hospital's main lobby at shift change. Past the security desk where he'd ordered her badge confiscated. Past the residents who stopped mid-conversation to stare. Past the vending machines, those same vending machines where he'd cornered her and reminded her that nurses who couldn't follow protocol found themselves escorted out by security. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Rodriguez stood near the main entrance, arms crossed, his face impassive as stone, and watched Whitfield pass with the satisfaction of someone who'd kept his integrity intact through pressure that would have bent most people to breaking. The perp walk was captured on 3 cell phones before they reached the parking lot. By evening, Dr. Whitfield's medical license was suspended pending criminal investigation, his hospital privileges revoked, his professional reputation atomized into something that would take decades to rebuild, if rebuilding was even possible. 2 weeks later, someone would spot him in a strip mall off Highway 99 selling supplemental insurance from a folding table and a card chair, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow, handing business cards to shoppers who wouldn't make eye contact. The mighty had fallen. But Danielle wasn't watching the fall. She was looking forward. 6 months later, Naval Base Kitsap, parade ground under clear October sky. Danielle stood in dress uniform, a Master Chief Petty Officer insignia on her sleeve crisp and exact, her full ribbon rack displayed across her chest, silver star and Navy cross positioned at regulation height. The tarnished challenge coin had been polished to mirror shine and mounted in a presentation case with an engraved plaque, *Phantom, she carried me home star. Marcus Chen stood 3 feet to her right in army dress blues, Medal of Honor hanging around his neck, his posture so perfect it looked like mathematics. The 2-star general presented her reinstatement papers. 200 sailors and soldiers formed up in formation, watching. For 15 years, the general said, his voice carrying across the parade ground, you honored an impossible order. You disappeared to protect your teammates, your mission, and your country. Today, your country returns the honor. The formation erupted in applause. Rodriguez stood in the front row, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Marcus Chen saluted her, his hand trembling slightly, his eyes bright. That evening, at Seattle General's renovated ICU, rechristened the Danielle Ross Critical Care Wing, the new chief of emergency medicine offered her the position, Director of Trauma Services, full physician authority, Veteran Outreach Program Development. Danielle accepted with a handshake, her composure still intact, but her eyes bright with something that looked like home. She was back in scrubs the next morning, training a young nurse on chest compressions, her voice patient and firm. You do it because they can't do it themselves. You carry them when they can't walk. That's the job. She paused, her hand resting on the young nurse's shoulder. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most. Through the ICU window, the polished challenge coin caught the morning light in its glass case on the wall, a reminder that some debts take 15 years to repay, but are never forgotten. And some nurses, no matter how quietly they move through the world, will always be remembered by the people they carried home. If you love a good underdog story, hit that like button now. Subscribe so you never miss one. And comment below, have you ever been the underdog? Let's see how this plays out.